Good.
All
We are
Edgy.
all here, yes.
Nowhere.
for the last time in 2023.
That's true. We won't see each other till next year.
That's right.
Yeah,
Last time for the whole year.
yeah.
It's been a good year.
It's certainly been interesting. Oh, here comes Mark.
Good.
Oh, okay. Hey, Mark. Hey there.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good
Good.
morning. Yeah,
Oh, are you in a warehouse of some sort?
I'm in a co-working space.
A work spot?
Yeah, co-working space. It's quite industrial looking.
yeah.
Yeah, it's industrial looking. Yeah.
Do you
Oh,
find that useful,
Say
Mark?
again.
Do you find that useful?
A co-working space?
Yeah.
Do I find it useful? I guess the answer is yes, because I do it. Um, to be more precise, I find the energy of others helpful,
Okay.
and to be part of a community that knows each other at least superficially.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know. Maybe the last thing I'd say is you really can't do much alone. So like being, you know, by oneself all of the time isn't particularly helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
looked into it a number of years ago and it never quite seemed worth the money. I never quite, so I never actually did it. But it was early on in the working space iteration. And it wasn't very sophisticated at that point. It was just basically a place to put your computer and sit. But they've gotten a little more rich in what they offer. So yeah, yeah,
oh.
just curious. Yeah.
Well, the new thing with me is I can hardly walk.
Oh no.
Well, it just, when you sit too long at an uncomfortable um, stool, like at the Apple store, I was at the Apple store
Uh,
yesterday and I sat for a long time while they were doing what they were doing with my phone and other. And that really messes me up when I sit too long
yeah,
anywhere, anytime.
yeah, yeah.
I guess my body must be getting old. It didn't used to do this. Oh, painful to walk.
Yeah. I am also thinking very strongly about next year, and am really excited to see what's going to happen. I've been putting a proposal together for the mayor of Spokane, and I will be submitting it probably the end of January, early February. I just have a few more people to talk to and connections to make to feel like I can speak for on their behalf in some way. Um, so I'm feeling like it's going to be a pretty consuming thing. And so I'm not sure about my timing. So I'm making this time a fixed thing in my schedule, but things happen and all of that. So I'm wondering, Ani, you have a Zoom account, right?
I do. I have a Zoom room.
So I would think if you also have a Zoom room that I should be able to make you a co-host so
Right.
that you can manage the room if I'm not there and get in. Because right now you can't get in. You have to be let in.
Right.
And so maybe we can play with that over the next few weeks and see if we can make that
Good.
happen so that
Yeah,
you're
too.
automatically, yeah.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
And feel free because I can have up to 500 people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they told me when I
No,
signed.
yeah. So invite folks. Yeah.
Come on.
Have you managed rooms? That is not an easy task.
Just a little bit, but it's easy. I mean,
Oh, it's not easy. Yeah. Well, it depends on how you do it, but it definitely can be a nerve wracker. Yeah.
say a little more because I have no conception.
Well, when you make small groups rooms, you've got options. You can do it manually, or the machine can do it for you.
When you do breakout groups, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. No, that could be really dicey.
Maybe
Especially
maybe
if you
maybe we could talk and you could orient me
okay.
to
Yeah, I mean
breakout.
it's not hard to set up if you're just doing it very simply, but if you want to keep different people in the room, for instance, instead of having the same people in the room, that gets really wicked. It can, especially if you're moving them fairly fast. Yeah,
Okay.
I did that for regeneration pollination, and it was definitely a learning curve.
Well, I'll reach out to you for a time with you. It won't take much. It won't take
Right,
long.
right.
Or if you know you have a spot open, that just let me know and I'll show up and learn from you.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure if we set it up with Zoom that it works. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Hmm.
Well, I have a whole new perspective on Christmas now. My this is I'm free of it. I'm free of Christmas.
I don't want to be free of Christmas. I like
I
it.
do. I do the all the cultural trappings and the expectations and the requirements and the disappointments and the busyness and the
Well,
so
I don't find that in my experience.
good.
I mean, I know it's there and you can certainly get caught into it, but I don't have that many people to buy gifts for, so buying gifts isn't a big
I
deal.
don't either.
And
But
I just like to get caught up in the energy and the enthusiasm and the joy and all of that. And it's just for me, it's just such a nice time to really reflect a little more and to hold the sacred a little closer. Even though I got sick.
yeah, well, I I broke through something this time. It's like even to the birth of a baby child that will save our souls from hell. You
Well, you
know,
don't have to think about it like that at all.
well, the thought crossed my mind. That's why I'm saying it's a new thought, and it's been liberating actually. So because we have each other, we have everything that we need. You know,
Yeah.
we don't need a savior to me anymore. I thought we did. I I had
Yeah,
that too.
I've never seen Jesus as a savior. I've seen Jesus always as an incredibly wise person and very connected to the spirit. So that's fine.
Absolutely.
I mean, anybody who gets there should be deeply appreciated. Wherever they came from, that's quite a trek to make, and to be able to live from that space is worthy of appreciation in my mind, whoever they are.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few of them. He's not the only one. Yeah.
Yeah, I can easily tune into that, but somehow I've been freed of it this Christmas. I don't know why, or
Yeah. Well, you had a fundamental background, didn't you?
I was a fundamentalist for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I sure was. I thought if you weren't speaking in tongues, you were going to hell. Yeah, I prefer this. Oh, well, what does 2024 hold for us? What are we holding for it?
Mm.
I don't know.
Well,
Simplicity.
Robert?
no, I don't want to cut you off, Ani. Sorry.
No, that was it. I'm holding simplicity.
No, last week, Catherine, you mentioned this video, Message from the Mother, which
Yes.
I'm spending quite a bit of time with. And I don't want to talk about that as prophecy. That sort of is confusing, to the, to the intellect. What I
Okay.
do want to mention about this message from the mother, and Mark, you weren't here last week, so you weren't aware of it. And it's a video which actually declares, a prophetic, a prophecy from, I don't know which tribe or nation she was involved in, but a Mexican, and a Native American elder was speaking about this prophecy, and I gather that she's from the Northwest. I gather, but
I think the prophecies from Central America or South America.
okay.
I wouldn't want
Well,
that was my
the whole thing I wanted to bring up today was just the how humanity might be reached in a way that really matters to them. Christianity did that by becoming a fictitious story. I mean, there's very little about the story that has been delivered in a way that at all comports to the truth of the matter from my own standpoint. I'm a deep believer in the teachings of a man who is supposedly called Jesus, and Christ being an accolade, placed with his name. And the teachings were magnificent. That's not what captured the imagination of the world. And I've been wondering for years just exactly what it would take. This message from the mother was just really stunned me. And the reason is that the speaker, the woman, made it very clear that this is not a question of revenge or striking back. The earth maybe has a sentient quality to it, a consciousness, as many would say, Lovelock, for instance, but that the earth is simply healing from its wounds, that it has to do this, that the time has come where it can no longer sustain the systems that are part of it, that are integral to it. The way, my feeling system, my digestive system, the way my systems continue to work. And if they aren't working, Annie, it's just like you get up in the morning and you can hardly walk. The earth is going through this. And just this 5 minute, well, actually a couple of minutes of this video portrayed this beautifully. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the impact of such a feeling impact, because the video, goes on and talks about, the earth, that some of the ways that we're going to be experiencing so-called, climate change are simply effects that were, that came about in response to what we've done to the earth. And no feelings, no, It's not a sense of backlash. It's just, it's what is. You do this, you get that reaction, you know.
May I inject one thing? While we do what you're saying, I would like to inject the understanding that I have and believe that we create our reality by what we say, that what we language, I mean, we actually create what we say, what we imagine. And I'm talking, I'm not talking like you can make shit up. I don't mean that. I mean, so yes, to have the dialogue that you're suggesting, and to know we have a responsibility for what comes out of our mouth, to and the vibration that we hold as we speak. And we always have the opportunity when we speak to create something that's worth creating, or to just trash everything by, you know, hey, that's it.
Ani, thank you. I mean, that's absolutely, you know, part of my thinking on this, that it seems as if through conversations like ours, because there are many other people having these conversations, there is an attempt being made by many, including us, to bring about a change in perception about what the earth really is. Is it a thing that stands apart, a commodity, a mass accumulation of commodity?
A resource.
A resource. Or is it a living part of ourselves? Or we are a living part of it? Or can you really draw the line? And my sensing is that this might be a way, by shifting consciousness about this, it might be a way to actually bring about some kind of change in people's attitudes. And of course, it brings into question many, many different, you know, ground beliefs, you know, of, say, capitalism, or, you know, many of the different political isms. You know, although capitalism in its truest form, I believe, could well persist within a new consciousness of what the world is and our relationship is to the world. It's not necessarily gregarious.
It's not sustainable.
But it's not sustainable the way it's now perceived. But in other words, so don't blame capitalism. It falls beyond that. It falls back in a basic approach to how we view the earth, how we view this place where life exists. And it may be the only place that life exists. So far, it's the only one that we've found. You know, there's something very special here. And how does this become, you know, such an integral part of ourselves? I mean, all human beings, that we could not but, you know, treat it with reverence and care.
We're earthen elementally. I mean, the earth came from the cosmos. You know, we're made of stardust and the elements of the earth. We're elementally earthen. So that's one factor and perspective.
Well, and there's a very valid question, which is being debated as we speak, I'm sure, by people who are interested in interstellar or inter-solar system, you know, travel by human beings. How much does a human being actually, is there any meaning to being a human being far afield in the cosmos in a steel cylinder. Are you still a human being, without the Earth? Is my point.
Yeah.
And it's highly debatable in my mind.
Yeah.
It's not debatable. Not scientifically or factually. We're elemental physically.
Well, I think part of what I'm hearing from Robert is a couple of thoughts. One, how do we change a larger consciousness to really be able to reflect on the changes we're going through in a way that's not terrorizing? And I think seeing the Earth as needing to make the changes to keep herself alive is a useful construct in that. And I also, and this is a really big conversation, so I don't know if we want to do it now, but the more I learn about how our bodies are literally from the Earth connected to all the other life here, having evolved through different kinds of relationships into the form that we are, whether it's even possible for us to live as a species for many generations away from the Earth. I'm not sure that's physically possible for our physical bodies. Now, the consciousness is a whole other thing. It can inhabit other forms, I think, without that being a problem. But I am not sure that in a physical body, our generations could be removed from the earth and still remain viable. I'm not at all sure that that would be possible. I think that we,
Water.
well, no, it's way more than that. We need so many. I mean, we're 33,000 different creatures. We need those creatures, and they are connected and come from the earth, from dirt, they live in other places around us. And we are refreshed by those when we have our hands in the dirt, when we play in the dirt, that kind of thing, because we're reconnected. To lose that connection over generations, I don't think would serve us well. I don't think we would be able to manage that. I do think we would see the deterioration of our species because we would not be able to maintain that viability. That's my current understanding.
Me
So,
too.
yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with the UAP project. So the government just passed and I guess, just signed into law. Biden just signed into law that project, which will release everything we know about extraterrestrials. So we are understanding about their traveling capacity and that kind of stuff and how they do it. So you can move faster in light. That's possible. I think there are other ways to do it as well. But releasing that knowledge is going to shift the general consciousness from we're all by ourselves to we're not. And what do you do about those others that we don't know anything about, and whether we'll be interested and curious or scared? And that's what we're doing. We're using what we've learned of their technology to keep us safe, to make weapons, not to do other kinds of things. That has been not our first default at this point. And whether that will be a distraction from dealing with issues on the earth or whether it will support it, I don't know.
So what's UAP?
Unidentified. I never can remember. They've changed it because instead of flying objects, they're not all flying. There's a lot of water stuff. There's an amazing amount of unidentified things in the water. So they broadened the term so that it includes anything unidentified that we have moving around the planet that we don't get. And they've got lots of stuff that has been collected over the years, and internationally as well. So they have created uh, and I'm not coming up with the name of it, but they've got a new department basically that Jim Garrison and Danny, whose last name I don't remember, are in charge of basically to shepherd the release of material. So they will be looking at material and flagging it for public release or not, or all of that, and managing that process. So they're very excited about it. And all of the first week in January, from January 7th on, there'll be 5 days explaining all of this to anybody who wants to listen on Humanity Rising. So if you're interested, it will be available 8 o'clock Pacific time. Yeah, you can just sign up and listen. So they're very excited about all that.
It,
One of my concerns about that is simply that human fascination fastens itself on almost anything else to avoid looking at itself.
Yeah.
That's what concerns me about a sudden, overflowing of information about extraterrestrials or whatever they may be.
Right.
Me
Got
too.
good entertainment value.
And then pretty soon we've got another savior.
Yeah.
There ain't no savior out there except getting down with who you are and what you really, really are.
Yeah, that's why it's not of great interest to me either at this point in time. Yeah, I realize it's there, but I'm not spending time with it.
Me neither.
Yeah, I'm much more focused on how to get people to do the things they need to do to make the place they live bearable in the foreseeable future. And then to begin to understand why that's not only important but necessary to do, and how to do it in a way that generates reverence instead of duty or any other sort of thing that would attach people to that. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even talking survival. It is about survival, I think, but that's not the frame that I want.
Right.
It's really about thriving.
And reverence.
Yeah, and making this place rich and robust.
Yeah. So I sent the video, the mother video, to a friend of mine, and
would you put the link in the chat so that Mark can get it? I was trying to find it. Yeah.
I did.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, it's just very interesting to me that video really, really moved me very, very deeply. And the main reason was that 7 years ago, when I was undergoing proton beam radiation therapy for prostate cancer.
Yeah, there it is, unidentified anomalous. Thank you.
So I had a lot of time to spend just thinking about why would I stay alive? What's even in it for me? Well, I found a lot, but the main thing was I had this ongoing desire to stay alive till 2025. I just from that all this time I've been feeling that these 2 years are going to be critical. And again, I'm not looking at it from the point of view of disaster. I'm looking at it as I think that we are at a turning point, conscious turning point, in terms of people beginning to really rise out of sort of the common, well, misunderstanding of what the earth really is one way to put it. But I'm just seeing so many different people in different groupings that have nothing in common with each other, and they are beginning to reach to the depths of these these formerly unknown areas. It's just very exciting to me. And I have a feeling these next 2 years are truly going to be a time period where humanity rising would be a good way to describe it, in consciousness, you know,
Yeah.
a rise in consciousness to unfold so many of the issues of the day, as well as so many aspects of what's going well, of what's right, of what's really working. I mean, there are many things.
Yeah.
They may not lead because they don't bleed, but there are a lot of things that are truly amazing.
Well, and they're starting to coalesce around bioregionalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is a lens that you can start to look through and see lots of different people doing different things.
Yeah.
I got so much from Barbara Marx Hubbard when she was here, when she was on Earth. A peace room in the White House
Mhm.
that connects what's working. You know, that, I mean, there are so many intelligent things that we can do.
Yeah.
And somehow it's an attitude. Somehow it's a soul where we put our attention is what makes the difference. And if we're afraid or if we're in love, and by in love, I mean with life. So we're amazing, and we can do about anything that we put our minds and hearts to. From a caring, compassionate, loving, creative, self-expressive, cooperative way.
Mark, are you familiar with Humanity Rising?
What? Say it again.
Oops, well, he just disappeared. I was asking Mark if he was familiar with Humanity Rising. I don't know that he was, so. Oh, there he is. Are you familiar with Humanity Rising, Mark? Hello.
Here we go.
Mark?
Catherine asked you
Yeah,
if
just
you're
dropped out
aware
for
of
a second
Humanity
there.
Rising.
In
Sorry.
short, yes.
Okay.
But perhaps not as intimately as you might be.
Yeah, I've been following them from the beginning. I've been a presenter. I've contributed to different programs in different ways. Been part of the after chat for years and all of that, but I'm not so into the UAP stuff. I just feel it's such a distraction. I mean, it's so interesting and it's so consuming and it's so entertaining. And so what?
I have to put a limit on information that I bring in, because I can get overloaded with information and involvement, and I'm not going to. I don't want to. It disturbs my innards.
So I want to go back to Robert's question. What do we think about how to generate a major shift? I know it's been worked on for a long time. Brian Swim and the Greens, the Green Dragon,
Yeah.
I think, with Brian Swim. Just there've been lots. They've been really exploring the other story, the news story that we need to have. And I don't know, we've hit on something that really seems to be resonant. I don't know that you really are going to know what's going to be resonant beforehand. I don't know that that's a possibility. But it's an interesting thing to speculate on how to frame the situation in a way that's catchy and generative, and really opens people up to possibilities that they hadn't seen before without creating artificial barriers of scarcity and fear.
I know for me, what helps me is keeping the understanding that I'm cosmic in origin, because that puts it in a whole new frame. And for me, that works. The larger the framework, the greater the freedom. Does that make any sense? Do you know what I mean? Mark? Yeah? You want to say, take it personally, speak personally about it?
I mean, in some ways, it's reasonably simple, as I think you're pointing to, is that we're an expression of the cosmos at the level of organization that life and humans exist at. Um, and that isn't a commonly known reality. And simply by you voicing it, that matters. Because we become the fullest expression of the cosmos through us as one species of life when we have the closest relationship to this reality, which is to say that we don't have our internal and collective storytelling telling something that's delusional or not connected to reality.
You've got a way with words, Mark. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I make sure that part of my daily awareness is that I am cosmic in origin. That makes all the difference to me. I stay free and open. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sort of an important partner to that idea, Arnie, which is like it could be summarized as humble action, which I think kind of gets to Robert's question, which is holding that larger reality, humbly knowing that we move into a different reality when we are becoming the person that's moving into that reality, which means we are becoming a person that is taking actions that bring it about. So we don't have to, I would suggest, we don't have to worry so much about convincing people over there to think or do something. Our work is to be becoming our version of ourselves and knowing that as we do that and our actions are the actions of that person, that will matter in the cosmos from our little place in it. In some ways, it's very simple, but we have a whole abstract narrative that that one of my peers would say we need to metabolize to be able to be on our own developmental journey of becoming that person and becoming that person that takes actions that bring it about from our place in the world.
Yeah, for me, that's what integrity is about.
Can you say more? Can you interpret what he said? I mean, can you speak what he said from your point of view, Catherine? Your languaging?
Well, what I would, so Mark, you can check and see if this works for you, but when we are ourselves, which has to include that cosmic piece because that's who we are, and we're conscious of that and act from that space, that keeps our actions and our sense of ourselves together as an integral whole. And that is integrity. That's what that is, where actions and understandings come together and reinforce each other. and are focused in the same way with the same intent and purpose. And allowing that flow to happen kind of becomes the intent and purpose. The allowing becomes the intent, not the direction of the flow or the results of the flow. And that gives that freedom to be responsive in the situation, in the immediacy. And that's how integrity is maintained. We, instead of applying things to make it so, it's allowing it to be, and that gives it that freedom, and that's what creates integrity. It's not a forcing to be a certain way. So we tend to think of it as a forcing thing, is that we're disciplined and controlled and we promise and all those kinds of things that keep us solid. But when you're dancing with life, you can't do that because things are constantly changing. Everything has its own input. And so to honor that input, you have to be responsive. You can't make it a certain way. You can have an intent for life. You can do that, but you can't define what that's going to look like in the instant, because it's not just you. You have to be responsive to the rest of your life around you. And that's what makes integrity happen in the real world. Not so much in the human world, but in the real world.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is this your definition of integrity sort of is the answer to the question of what do people mean when they say, don't use the word try. You can never try to do anything.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
The way I would parse that is this allowing is a way of being. You're not trying, you're not thinking about a thing or a type that you wish to be or become, a type of consciousness, a type of physicality. You're not trying to do that. You're simply allowing yourself to be molded by the flow of life to become whatever is required to meet a situation. It's a very different point of view, one that could be joyous, actually, as opposed to concentrated and, sweat of the brow, as friends of mine say. So,
yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Wu Wei instead of Yui.
Yeah. And how do you get this? I mean, this type of knowledge has been known for thousands and thousands of years. And now it's seen as a mystical pipe dream because people are trying to get it,
So you have to do it this way, or you have to be a Buddhist, or you have to be a whatever.
Who's this teacher? I got a great guru.
I think my mysticism is grounded in the time I spend just exploring my own identity. I mean, who am I? Because and that's not human centric. Because I'm stardust for one thing. I mean, I'm cosmic. I'm ecological. I'm metaphysical. Those three things are true about the being that I am. And so exploring my own identity helps me to, I don't know, embrace everything.
I think that's what you do so well in poetry.
Definitely.
Yeah, Ani
Yeah.
does very nice poetry.
Thanks. I don't spend enough time focused on that and doing that. Because I love it. It's, my cells love it.
I feel like there's a natural extension here from what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, where we were elevating the idea of the movement from human-centric to life-centric. And I think the thing that's coming up today, which isn't new, but maybe it's simply a new articulation of it in the space, which is continuing the movement from life-centric to cosmos-centric. And part of what I want to point to there is like the general space of when we have these questions, what we're actually communicating is not knowing something. And this is a bit of a stretch perhaps, but like when we talk about UAPs, what we're really communicating is a not knowing of something. Because whilst it could be that the evidence we have of these phenomena are pointing to something that exists in the biological space, I think that there's also, I don't want to say it like that. It is possible that these phenomena aren't biological in nature. They could be something else in terms of energetics or physics or chemistry in a form that just is not known to us. And by knowing to us, noticing that we can only know things that we have the ability to be aware of. So from a sensory perspective, we can't know things that are outside of our sensory perception. It doesn't mean to say that those things don't exist, obviously. And so like as we come to a cosmocentric thing and we hold, in some ways, again, this is like humility. Again, it's like knowing our limitations and not projecting human-centric understanding or knowing onto things that we don't have the ability to know. And so like it's very possible that some of these phenomenon in the UAP space are really not what we think they are, because we're looking at them from a human-centric perspective as opposed to a life-centric perspective, as opposed to a cosmos-centric perspective. And that matters because we start to tell stories which aren't a sufficient capturing of reality, and then we take actions as a result of that aren't adaptive or maladaptive. And to kind of put a bow on this, the living world is telling us that our job is to act within our space of knowing, because that's where we can have the most purchase or most participation in the emergence of the cosmos. Our as individuals, some individuals might have access to other levels of the cosmos that are non-normative or not normative to the majority of humans. And sure, that's their space. That could be a space that's accessible for them to work in, but for many people that might not or might not be today. And so we're creating more potential in the cosmos when we're acting in our field of knowing and don't have delusion in it.
I like what you're saying. Yeah.
I think that's actually one of the lessons that we get when we start paying attention to life as expressed on this planet. Plants in particular can expand our awareness dramatically because they function in a very different space at very different ways of being. On a sad note, along that lines, I spent some time reading lots of testimony from people who are seeing the impact of 5G on insects and how the subtleness of that is impacting their ability to use the energy fields that they have been using for their own life that we don't pay any attention to and don't, in fact, appear to impact us very much, except for occasional people who are really sensitive to that. But most of us don't really feel, experience, or recognize any of that kind of situations. And yet the insect life really does. And the way they locomote, the way they get around, the way they understand their self in space and time is very much attached to those frequencies. And the frequencies we're using for our telephones are interfering with their ability to function in that way. And, you know, so we're getting messages from other life on this planet of other levels of understanding if we wish to pay attention to it. And we have ignored it because it does, I don't feel it, you know, it's not my experience, therefore it doesn't exist. And I think we're getting tapped on the shoulder to say you don't have to know it, but you have to understand its importance to you. And you better start paying attention to that, or it will impact your life because we support your life. And if we ain't here, you ain't. Yeah, so I think this just paying attention to the life on this planet will open us up to all sorts of other levels of understanding that we have just not had the time to pay attention to. We have just stopped looking at nature. We've gotten involved in other stuff. And so we don't see the impact. We just don't notice it. And we just have to stop and start doing that. Yeah, just being responsive to life. I just think we will find such an opening in our own understanding and our own capacity, frankly, because when you start paying attention, you develop those skills. You know, that's how skills developed. And if we start paying attention to seeing those things, we will become sensitive. We will be able to develop those capacities. We've just diverted ourselves with other things of interest instead of life. And it's just having an impact. It's time to change our point of view.
But that's important. What you just said is important as well, because there's no blame. There's no blame, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't perceived. It isn't
Yeah.
as we're out to get, to
No, we're not malicious. We're not.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to feel badly about it, but there is reason to change.
We are human centric. We do tend to be human centric though, and we have to be very, very careful about that.
Well, and what do we pay attention to? And this is true actually from every species that I've been able to watch. Every species pays more attention to its own species than anything else. That really is the big attention getter. And one of our capacities, I believe, is that we can expand beyond that much more easily than other animals seemed to do. Plants, I'm not so sure about, but animals, I can say that for. Plants seem to have a much broader basis. I'm going to throw this out, and it may seem like a segue, but it's a puzzle to me, and I don't have an answer. When I'm thinking, because what we're talking about has to do with the relationships we have with other things other than our own species, however you want to look at that, from a bee's point of view, or mosquitoes, or plants. And there's a sensitivity to our own species because we have to get along with each other that is vital. And then there's the sensitive to everything else, which supports our ability to be here. And that's that you can say that at every level, from every perspective, I think, because we're so interrelated. So I tend to want to use the word ecologies around that, and it's not necessarily totally true. There's another word which I've been fighting against, networks, networks. And I'm on the edge of sensing the relationship of networks to ecologies, but it's not really clear to me yet. So it appears to me that networks are very useful, especially when you're going from a general field to a specific field. It's a mechanism to make that specific, to gather together things, nodes of the network, to pull those together, to enrich and enliven them for a purpose. And yet an ecology is a living space where lots of things have come together to live. I have a friend, and her story that she told very lovingly and beautifully is that when you have a group of people and there is a crisis, a flood, you reach out to the people in your network to say there's a flood, and they come together then to help you in that. And if you stay in that flood space together, you're managing the water, you're managing it afterwards, and that becomes more like an ecology where you're living together and creating the space of living together, but not necessarily. So I don't really get the difference. I see that networks are important. It's something that Fritjof really clings to. It's a big thing, and I'm going to go back and read some of his stuff on that. But I don't see how it fits into life exactly. One of the other things that I've looked at is the spores. Spores are just so wonderful. And years ago, this was used as an example. They were used as an example of self-organization because spores live all over, and when there's not enough food, they come together and they actually create organisms that walk. And they walk into different spaces to find food, and then they splatter again. So here we have a network that comes together, creates another organism actually that can move, and then they dissipate. So there's a living network example in my mind that happens, but it's not a permanent structure. But it is a structure, and it's an invisible structure because those connections maintain even when they're separated. Otherwise, they couldn't be pulled together. So there's something about that, those connections that are invisible, that are as important, especially at certain points of time, crisis time, as the lived relationships that you manage to stay stable. And that's just an interesting juxtaposition. So I love thoughts.
I don't see anything I don't see difference in what you're saying between anything you said and anything else you said. I mean, the networks are organisms. I don't.
Well, they're a kind of relation. They have to be a kind of relationship because
Sure.
they're an acknowledgement of the presence of the other, and a recognition of the specialness of the other
They're
in
parts of
certain
a whole.
circumstances. But it changes.
Huh?
Yeah. I mean, the networks change. You can be involved in lots of different networks that don't even have any relationship to each other.
Right. Well, what's the quandary?
I think I might be able to help paint this a little bit. And I think we can use the language that we've been using: human-centric, life-centric, cosmocentric, and at a very basic level, and this isn't necessarily 100% correct, but it's directional, which is when we think of networks, that's kind of a human-centric thing. When we think of ecologies, that's a life-centric thing. And then when we think about it from a cosmos perspective, I would say that is systems. And so when what we're doing when we think about things of networks, we're really flattening the system space into a sort of a simple node and connection perspective, which is flattening that whole system through ecologies into a network that is something that we can understand. And whilst for a very specific instance that might be helpful, what we have done is collapse the combinatorially explosive dimensions of systems that exist and must exist into something that is flat for us to understand, but is now a shadow of its former self because it just doesn't have the completeness of connections and fidelity between them anymore because they've all been broken. And so like, if we were to think about it from like a node and connection perspective between different nodes, a given node has a very large number of different parts or levels to it that has connections to different nodes depending on what it is. And so like to have like a network be a true reflection on it, it would just literally be unrepresentable because it's so multidimensional and so many different layers that it wouldn't be helpful. So to sort of maybe like repeat what I said at the beginning, a network is just a simplification of an ecology, and ecology is a symbolical level. And whilst it might be helpful for a thinking human, it only has a small amount of assistance to help our thinking, but maybe not as much as we think it does. So if we get stuck much to know enough to take situationally appropriate action.
I didn't get your
I don't know if that muddy.
Well, you kind of hit on my irritation about it. I've just like networks to me are so linear and they're so shallow. Networks.
Are
So
what?
Networks are linear and shallow. I find a huge resistance to the thing because it doesn't feel living. And so yeah.
But everything living is a network.
Is part of it's part of a network. It's part of bunches of networks, actually, which is Mark's point is what I heard is that there's so many networks that we're connected with that we all would look like spiders, you know. And so how do you picture that? How do you think about that? And so we've made it really simple, and I can really agree with that. I do see it as a relevant understanding. It's not something that I want to dismiss or say doesn't exist or is not important because I don't think that's true. But I'm just really trying to find the right place for it, so that it doesn't distort the understanding that we have of how things work. Because it's definitely a part of it, but it's such a intangible structure in so many ways. It's such a light piece, but it's significant. I mean, those spores could not reconnect if they weren't maintaining that connection in some way. And what I think is important to that is to really recognize the intangibility. That connection is not because they're next door to each other. They may not be. They may have to travel some ways to come back together again, to move to a new location. So how are they doing that? They do not have 5G. They do not have telephones. They do not have the internet, and yet they're connected in a way that allows them to understand the signal. We need to come together again and move someplace else. They can do that without any of the stuff we have and with way less brain power, we think, than what we have. And yet they're able to make that connection. So, you know, and we're made of the same stuff. So it's not like, and I do think we have that connection. That's how things disseminate in ways that we don't understand, how we kind of get stuff from other places and ideas, how ideas float through the ether and several people will pick them up in various different places. I mean, that's a level of connection that we don't really honor, and that has gotten dicey because we can't trust. You've got to be able to trust it that way. That's got to be absolute trust. There can't be any doubt that there's going to be an artificial signal or an unimportant thing raised as importance. You've just got to be able to trust at that level.
I think an offering for how to keep networks or the idea of networks useful is to label them correctly, which is to say, this is the network that connects these nodes together on this particular veneer of knowing. And by saying that, we're saying what it does capture and potentially holding space for the fact that it doesn't capture a whole bunch of other stuff that matters to the system or matters to the ecology. And so therefore it's only so helpful. It's helpful in a little ways, perhaps, for us thinking and knowing and working with the thing that the network captures, but it's not really helping with any of the other things that are relevant to, in this description, like the health of the node, because the health of the node is dependent on that network and a whole bunch of other networks that this particular capturing doesn't include.
Yeah.
So to label them correctly.
I'm kind of confused, I guess, because my understanding of network is every living organism is a network. It is. It's a living
network. It's a node in a network. It's not a network itself.
I think I would say it differently. Every living thing is a system. A network is a simpler version of a system. And by making it go from a system to a network, we're losing too much information to be able to know it from.
A network is a system. Systems are networks. Living organisms are networks and systems, living systems. I mean, it's Capra stuff. Do you disagree?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I mean, I love Capra. I've been with him for decades, actually. He's been foundational to my understanding. That doesn't mean that he's always 100% right either. And he asked me, this part of this happened, and it's starting to crop up in interesting ways. So when we did the interbeing diagram, and then I did the paper off of that on autopoiesis, and I sent it to him, and he sent back and he said, include networks and emergence, because I didn't talk about the whole diagram that we had. And I've had this resistance to networks anyway. I don't like the word. It doesn't resonate with me. It's very linear, very cold, very hard, very dry for me. So I'm trying to make that a living thing, and I wanted to go to ecologies, but I'm not. I can't quite do that in my own mind, because there's a difference between the two in my mind. So I can't just change that word to ecologies, because it's not quite right. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to put all that together in a way that makes sense for me. And I have not yet found the languaging to actually do that.
So,
and what I'm seeing in a lot of the system stuff is that there are lots of confusions. And Ani, we talked about this, so lots of confusions about scale and level. And we're using different words that really affect different levels and scales, and we intermingled them. And I've seen that in my own model of systems that I use, the resilient value set, that there are several levels encased in that. It's not all at the same level. And so I think beginning to start to really understand that, and to, if it's not necessarily to change it, but to be able to articulate and to see the different ways those things go together, is really important. Because lots of people are now coming out with And Jeremy Lent's got his own ecological principles and all that. And I look at him and I go, yeah, okay, so, but not really. There's certain pieces there that, yes, and which is why I didn't create it. I looked at what everybody else was doing and saw and said, everybody is seeing this word across the board. Okay, relationship across the board. There's nobody that doesn't talk about systems and doesn't have the word relationship in there, period. So that's key. And what are kinds of things like are always there? And those were the things that I picked for the resilient value set. But there's still there's stuff there that can be teased out that's not quite there yet. Because I think that part of the incoherence we feel, which makes it not stick, is this messiness between values and levels and scaling, and how those dynamics really show up. And they're not articulated. We're not really paying attention to that precisely yet. And I think that's part of the yes, but stuff we feel when we see what people have done. It's like almost. And the indigenous voice is so strongly enmeshed in life, in the world they see, that those languages just relate there. They haven't taken them up to the next level. They've not extended them in any way. They just pay attention to what they see right here. And so their language is right there. And it's mostly story for that reason, because the stories contain. I have a good friend who did tons of work on this, Verna Ali. And there are 7 levels of understanding. So you've got data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and several others, which I'm not quite remembering. And I haven't overlaid that system on this. It would be a good thing to do. We've just talked yesterday, so maybe I will nudge her to think about that. It really frames, stories hold all of that, which is why they're so valuable. Because if you don't have all those levels of knowledge, you're looking for the missing one. And it makes it hard to move or to trust the story or to really integrate it until you've got all levels. And so we have data. Data tells us stuff, yes, but you notice that doesn't matter sometimes. We just don't get it because it's not coalesced into information or knowledge. We don't have enough of the story that holds that whole collection of stuff to be complete. And when it's complete, then we feel like we can act on it. Then it becomes part of us. Like we can do things, we can trust it. And without that, there's always these holes. So I'm kind of feeling that around the system stuff too, that it's just too many pieces. The stories aren't complete yet somehow, or we're messing with those and not being discreet enough with the different levels or pieces that we have. We're holding them all the same, and they're not all necessarily the same. Yeah.
They're not the same, but they're part of the same thing.
Oh yeah, they're not unimportant, but they're just not in the right spot yet. And so it just doesn't feel right. It does, there's a antsiness about it that's not just because it's not complete. It's not right. And we'll know it when it's right. It will sit. It sits.
I've got to get going.
Yep. We overdid it.
I appreciate all of you.
Yes.
I'll
Yes.
see you next year.
Been a wonderful year. Yes.
Forward to it.
Look forward to the new one.
Bless you. Look forward to next Friday.
Much gratitude. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.